Good morning, David.
We spoke about this in detail yesterday, and we saw also Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, calling for de-escalation in the Middle East. Washington very keen to point out it was not involved in any offensive operation. I find it interesting, and we spoke about this at the beginning of the show. I think it was obvious that Israel would respond. Of course, we had Biden saying, please do not respond. We had David Cameron saying, do not respond. I don't think Israel had any other option than to respond. What did you make of the response, if indeed it did come from Israel? Was it that message, but without further provocation?
Well, if we take a step back for a second and to look at the wider lens of the situation which is unfolding, there's been a history of Iran and Israel taking actions against one another, such as Israel striking Iranian-backed rebels in Syria back in 2019. Iran, they never confirmed they did, but Iran taking control of a vessel in 2021, an Israeli managed and owned vessel, and killing 2 people. So this is the foundations have been laid for the events that we've seen for a couple of years. In terms of was it a message, the recent strike into Iran, and of course we have to re-acknowledge that Israel have not formally claimed responsibility for that. The difference between these activities in the last week and those that have been going on for a couple of years is that the ante was significantly upped, if you like, when Iran launched over 300 air assets, combined drones and ballistic missiles, directly at the Israeli state, because doing so puts a significant number of civilian lives at risk. And that's never happened, certainly in the last few years. So that's where the ante got upped.
And this was actually a week ago, where Iran launched this attack of 330 drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. But again, why did Iran choose to get involved in person, as it were, instead of fighting through its proxies, which is its usual modus operandi?
Well, it was because of the consulate strike at the beginning of April.
This in Syria, in Damascus.
In Damascus, and this was their response. However, again, the emphasis with regards to the response by Israel, and again, they've not formally claimed, but this response from Israel sent a very clear message, because out of those over 300 air assets, 99% of them were taken down. They were taken down by a coalition of, with France, I believe, monitoring airspace, the US and the UK support, but even Jordan as well, even supported. And that's another Arab nation supporting, Israel in their defense. And that sends a very clear message of how difficult it is to be able to have a sustained conflict with Israel. And of course, with Israel and the response from supposed response from Israel, when this strike was launched, it got in a good few hundred kilometers into Iranian space. Now, that's going to send a very clear message, because Israel's supposed, we'll assume it's Israel just for the context, was very targeted indeed. Whereas Iran's actions was very blanketed. It was used to overwhelm the defense systems, and they failed on every count. Whereas Israel sent a very, very targeted response, and it did work because it penetrated their airspace and their land space. And that's 2 very different messages. So essentially that would have to make Iran sit back and think for a second if they want to escalate anymore or not.
And in terms of what they use these quadcopters, which are Israel's calling card. As you say, they struck deep into the heart of Iran in Isfahan. In terms of the strategic importance of that particular place, it is home to a large air base, a major missile production complex, several nuclear facilities as well. So are you saying that actually what Israel did was targeted and it was smart?
Yes. Far smarter response.
So what?
then
So what happens next? Is it a case, because Iran is playing this down, saying, well, actually, it was nothing of any significance at all. Iran often responds in the cold light of day. It often sits and waits and then responds later in time. Is Iran likely to do that? Because neither side actually can afford for this to escalate. So is this the end of the matter, or does Iran then retaliate at a particular time later, a later date?
well, I mean, given the history of the activity between the two states, I mean, we can go back as far as 2019. When we say is it the end of this situation, we have to look at the situation as it is, and judging by activities going back to 2019, you can only assume that something may happen, but it depends upon what the appetite of each nation is. I don't think I think what's happened in the last week is that both nations have decided that they don't want a state-on-state war. So if they like, they could actually revert back to these similar activities that we've seen with strikes against Iran rebels, you know, and a taking of ships, for example, which is more of a shadow war than a state-on-state war. So what we're likely to see is that we will see movements of going back to more shadow war tactics and maneuvers between the two states rather than a state-on-state war.
So essentially acting through those proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, for example, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So more likely to be that going forward.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like, because neither state has been vocal in the last 24, 48 hours, and that's significant. That means that they want to downplay the messaging, and they probably have realised that, you know, there is no winners. To paraphrase David Cameron, that you know, there's no one can succeed out of a conflict, and Antony Blinken and David Cameron are absolutely correct in their stance on this.
And can I just ask you about Qatar? Because Qatar, and I mentioned this yesterday, is reassessing its role as the mediator between Israel and Hamas. As we know, Qatar plays a very important strategic role here. But Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani said Doha has been exploited and abused and is being undermined by those trying to score political points. How much should we read into that, and how much of this is actually Qatar, a very small country, saying, look, we're really important in what is going on and in having some sort of meaningful peace?
Yeah, Qatar has traditionally always tried to take a role as a regional broker, and this rhetoric is part of that, is emphasising their importance to be someone who's neither. They're trying to position as neither a significant threat, but as more as a diplomatic influencer. And that's what I'll read into that message as it currently stands.
So for people waking up this morning and looking at what's going on, what message would you like to send out about where we are in terms of any escalation, inflammation of the current situation? Or can you reassure people that actually what they've seen recently is likely to die down and will go back, as you said earlier, to probably using those proxies?
Well, I think we can be cautious in terms of our optimism over the next steps. However, we do have to be aware that there's a lot unfolding around the world. There's a lot of regional and strategic interest which affects a number of different global players and global actors. We've seen, for example, sanctions more sanctions rather, that have been imposed on Iran by Britain, and that should directly impact the supply chain of these Shahed drones produced by Iran to Russia. So there's a lot of interrelation and a lot of moving parts at the moment. If I could reassure people, I would love to, but we are in a very, very cautious, very unstable time in the world at the moment. So as long as we, still tongues keep a wise head, and I'm going to take that line as it currently stands.
And a very wise line indeed. Shane, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Shane Mason, geopolitical and defence analyst.